Good afternoon and good morning to some of you. My name is Gloria Rogers, and I serve as the second vice president of the National Episcopal Church Women Board. It is my pleasure to welcome you today. I would also like to begin by extending our sincere gratitude to NGOCSW 70 for providing us with the opportunity to participate in this important event. The Episcopal Church women have long served as a strong voice for advocacy both within both the church and the broader community. Through fellowship, education, and service, ECW works to empower women to lead, to build meaningful connections, and to engage thoughtfully with the pressing issues of our time. The Episcopal Church remains committed to addressing global issues affecting women by challenging gender-based discrimination and advocating for the dignity and rights of women everywhere. This commitment is reflected through our engagement in international gatherings, such as the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women, where we continue to support intersectional approaches to justice and equity. Central to ECW's mission is social justice, mobilizing faithful women to respond to the needs of their communities while connecting the church to broader public concerns. Today, our focus is on raising awareness of missing and murdered Indigenous women. This session aims to bring greater attention, education, and meaningful dialogue to this urgent and ongoing crisis. So thank you for being here today as we gather to listen, learn, and reflect on an issue that deeply affects many communities. Our panelists today are the retired Reverend Canon Debbie Royers from Tucson, Arizona. She is a mother, sister, mother of two sons, and grandmother of four. Reverend Royers served as an Episcopal priest, retreat leader, author, and educator. She previously served as canon for Native American ministry in the Diocese of Arizona and is currently developing a new Indigenous church community called Four Winds, created to serve and uplift Indigenous people. Reverend Royers will speak about the legacy of doctrine of discovery. Our next panel would be Ms. Madeline Sampson. Madeline is the wife of the Reverend Leon Sampson and mother of seven. She is from Navajo land in southeastern Utah. As a devoted member of the Episcopal Church, she has served as president of Province 8 and was a member on the National Episcopal Church Board. Madeline is a strong advocate for tribal sovereignty, education, environmental stability, healthcare access, and educational equity. Today, she will share truth-telling about the experience of Navajo. One of our presenters who could not be here today because of an emergency was the Reverend Twyla Tubles. She is from the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota. So we have to apologize for her absentees of today. Our final representative is the Reverend Canon Isaac Shaniqua Brokenley, who is an enrolled member of the Roseburg Sioux tribe. She served as an Episcopal priest in the Episcopal Diocese of South Dakota. She also serves as the staff officer for reconciliation, racial conciliation, social justice, and creation care for the Episcopal Church, and is a member of the presiding bishop's staff. We invite you to join our panel as we discuss the urgent issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women. Reverend Canon, Debbie, you may start.
Leo Senchianiavu, Ketchimalea. Thank you, Gloria, very much for this invitation, and to the ECW for doing this work with us. Greetings to you all from Tucson, Arizona. I am Pasquayaki from Tucson, born and raised. And in Tucson, if you are not familiar with it, Arizona is home to 22 federally recognized tribes. There are two in the Tucson area, the Pasquayaki tribe that I am from and the Tohono O'odham people. And I'll be talking a little bit about experiences with them. From the beginning of colonization and the presence of settler mentality, Indigenous people as sovereigns engaged with foreign countries as governments. As sovereigns, Native Americans held full authority over the lands and the people within their respective territories. The diminishment of this authority to a position of dependent nations within the U.S. occurred as a result of U.S. colonization and is directly related to the doctrine of discovery. The quality of life of citizens of any nation is bound by the authority and the resources of their respective governments to create stable and safe communities. The crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous women refers to the disproportionately high rates of violence against Indigenous women and girls, including disappearances and homicides. Key terminology includes Indigenous, referring to Native American peoples, and MMIW, which highlights systemic violence and a neglected face of this group. Some of our Indigenous people are now referring to this crisis by using the term MMIR, or missing and murdered Indigenous relatives, to include men and the LGBTQ community. I will focus on the women. Understanding this crisis involves recognizing intersectional factors of race, gender, and colonial history that have contributed to these alarming statistics. So let's begin with the statistics. Currently, there is an estimated 5,712 missing and murdered Indigenous women. This is only 2% of the population. Native people are only 2%. And yet we are 60% of missing and murdered cases. How many times higher a murder rate do you think missing and murdered Indigenous women experience over non-Indigenous women? It's 10 times higher a murder rate. Currently, there are only 116 missing and murdered Indigenous women out of more than the 5,000 documented cases being investigated. 116 out of 5,712. More than 4 out of 5 American Indian and Alaska Native women have experienced some kind of violence in their lifetime. The statistics demonstrate that Native women suffer from violence at a rate of 2.5 times greater than any other population in the U.S. 1 in 3 Native women will be raped in their lifetime. 1 in 3. And 4 out of 5 Native women will be victims of some sort of violent assault. It is startling that non-Native perpetrators commit the majority of these crimes. On some reservations, Native women are killed 10 times the national average. Those are startling statistics, so I'm going to just repeat. There are 5,712 Indigenous women and girls that have gone missing. This is 60% of Indigenous women, despite being only 2% of the U.S. population, and only 116 are being investigated. In urban city settings, which Tucson is, we are documenting about 506 cases across 71 in urban cities. 128 were documented as missing Indigenous women, 280 were murdered Indigenous women, and 98 were unknown status. The mean age of these women is 29. So it isn't much better when we look at urban city centers, particularly acknowledging now that we have statistics demonstrating that there are more Native people living off reservation than on reservation. The historical legacy of colonization, including forced assimilation policies, residential schools or boarding schools, as we call them, and the dispossession of Indigenous lands created systemic conditions that perpetrate violence and marginalization of Indigenous women. Institutional racism and cultural genocide have undermined Indigenous sovereignty and social structures, contributing to the vulnerabilities that persist today. Understanding these deep-rooted factors is essential to addressing the current injustices within legal, social, and health systems. Colonialism and the ongoing systemic racism destroyed traditional ways of life for Indigenous men, women, and children. It included the seizure of land and the forced erosion of language, culture, spirituality, and traditional values. As a result, the traditional roles of men and women, the traditional social systems were diminished and devalued, causing immeasurable harm. Women who were once respected and honored for their spiritual and mental strength lost their traditional roles of leadership and the reverence as life givers. The Indian Act, residential school systems or boarding schools, the 60s scoop, all contributed to further loss of family structures and caregiving roles, resulting in generational poverty, inadequate housing, food insecurity, mental, spiritual, and physical concerns. These issues are further compounded today by ongoing discrimination and racism, inequities in health, education opportunities, social services, and deep-rooted intergenerational issues with addictions and family violence in our Native communities. Systemic discrimination against Indigenous people manifest in economic inequities, inadequate access to education and healthcare, and high rates of incarceration. Marginalization from mainstream society and institutional distrust create barriers to reporting violence and accessing justice. Studies now show that Indigenous women often face bias in policing and social services, which exacerbates their vulnerability to violence and reduces accountability for perpetrators. Indigenous women and girls face structural and systemic issues that increase their risk of experiencing partner violence. Violence against Indigenous women continues due to the prevalence of racism and misogyny, inequalities in Indigenous women and girls' economic, social, political, and cultural rights, the disruption of Indigenous communities caused by the historic and present-day removal of children from our homes, the overrepresentation of Indigenous women in the criminal justice system, inadequate police responses to violence against Indigenous women, and the overrepresentation of children and youth in the child welfare system are all contributors. Poverty, homelessness, substance abuse, The lack of stable employment significantly increases the risk of Indigenous women experiencing violence. Indigenous women disproportionately experience socioeconomic hardships linked to the colonial displacement and marginalization. Data indicates that Indigenous women living in remote and urban marginalized areas are at higher risk of becoming victims of violence. Investigations into cases of MMIW often suffer from inadequate resources, poor interagency communication, and jurisdictional complexities, especially on tribal lands. A lack of cultural competence and systemic bias leads to the underreporting and the low clearance rates for violent crimes against Indigenous women. These gaps have been linked to prolonged investigations, lack of victim support, and the failure to prosecute offenders effectively, perpetrating mistrust and injustice. A few examples of highly discriminated ways in which knowledge of these horrific acts are shared in public information networks include, for many of you, you may have noticed recently the huge campaign that has been happening on the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie, Savannah Guthrie, who is a morning show host on NBC. Her mother was abducted here in their Tucson home 39 days ago. It's been made national news. There have been many agencies involved: local police, sheriff, state sheriff, and FBI. But ask yourself, when you heard this name, did you also hear the name of a missing and murdered Indigenous woman? Another place that I've made note year after year in the Episcopal Church when we commemorate Matthew Shepard, whose violent death was a terrible and brutal death. Do you know about Fred Martinez, a transgendered 16-year-old from Cortez, Colorado? These questions should bring attention to us of how little attention missing and murdered Indigenous women get. These are only examples of why missing and murdered Indigenous women is so important for us to share, to tell the truth, and to engage with systems of injustice. We truly have to respect the dignity of every human being. In my time here in Tucson, we have had two very significant incidents of missing and murdered. Amalia, 11 years old, has been missing for 7 years. She would be 18 now. She disappeared when walking home from school. Yes, it was a school that was on the outlying areas of Tucson and not on tribal land. The perpetrator has never been found. Her family has never heard what happened to their daughter, to their sister, to their cousin. And then there is Cecilia. Cecilia is 28 years old. She was 20 when she disappeared on the reservation, where there was a construction project underway with outside contractors, non-Indigenous outside contractors that were present putting in power lines. These camps are often referred to as man camps because they are temporary and they bring in people from the outside. And we know that her last contact was with one of these men. But before any investigation took place, the man was transferred to some other place, and no investigation followed for Cecilia, who again, we do not know what happened to her. She has never been seen again. As we engage with these stories, and you're going to hear more, we continue to tell the truth. And I personally appreciate the opportunity to continue to share the truth in this venue, as in many that I teach in, social service folks, social workers, schools, any place that will listen to this history, because we will encounter it at some point in our life. The question is, do we respect the dignity of every human being, and will we do anything about it? Thank you, Gloria.
Okay. And thank you, Reverend Canon Deborah, for that informative presentation. It was truly an eye-opening to hear about the underreported data and the alarming number of missing and murdered females, both who have been accounted for and those who remain missing or unreported. Your words help us bring awareness to a crisis that too often goes unseen. Thank you for helping us to better understand the scope and the importance of this issue. I just want to say here, if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat line and on the chat, because we will have a chance to answer questions later. Next, we will have our speaker, Madeline Sampson.
Ja, bin Madeline Sampson and she nota Nshle do Islan Bashichin look at the net Bashiche do Dashanale. Monument Valley da Utah da Nasha. Hot at the Sanshle. I'm currently serving in the role of the Episcopal Church as Province 8 ECW President, active member with Missionary Diocese of Navajo Land that covers the four corners of Utah, New Mexico, and Arizona, and currently living in Fort Defiance, Arizona at Good Shepherd Mission. I would like to share two MMIW scenarios to share with you. The first one is a lady by the name of Ella Mae Begay. She's a professional Navajo rug weaver. By the name, she's from Sweetwater, Arizona. She went missing June 15, 2021 from her home at 2:30 in the morning, along with her truck, 2005 F-150. Ella's case has helped bring national attention to the high rate of violence faced by Native American people, providing fuel for the tribal leaders and victim advocates as they continue pushing for law enforcement resources and more cooperation for investigations across jurisdictional lines. On January 29, 26, Preston Toll is the only suspect in June 2021 disappearance of Ella Mae Begay, who agreed to plead guilty to a single charge of robbery. Preston has assaulted Ella numerous times while driving, and he dumped her body off on the side of the road. Up to this day, she hasn't been found. The second scenario is Emily Pike. Emily Pike is 14 years old from San Carlos Apache, was living at a group home in Mesa, Arizona. She was last seen on January 27th at 7:45 p.m. Per police report, Emily's mom was not notified of her disappearance until a week later from the group home. Emily had a history of fleeing the group home prior to her murder. Group home is 100 miles away from her San Carlos Apache reservation. On one of those incidents, she pleaded with the officers not to be taken back to the group home and told them she wanted to be with her grandma. On February 14, 2025, the remains of Emily Pike were found off Highway 60 in Arizona, near Globe and San Carlos Indian Reservation. On June 27, 2025, Gila County Sheriff's Office announced that hikers had found large contractor trash bags with the remains of an unidentified female, later identified as Emily Pike. Detectives were unable to find Emily's arms and hands. Autopsy showed that she had face and head trauma. Her death is ruled as a homicide. No one's arrested, but 3 potential suspects are being interrogated at this time. Emily was found 1 month after reported missing. There is an FBI reward for $75,000. In May 2025, Governor Katie Hobbs of Arizona signed the Emily's Law, also known as Turquoise Alert. The alert notifies public of missing person under the age of 65 who is a member of a federally recognized tribe who has gone missing under the suspicious circumstances. At this time, John, can you share the artwork? I would like to describe this. Sorry. I would like to describe this MMIW group shirt that was designed by Walina George. She's a Shoshone-Bannock tribal member of Fort Halls, Idaho, who is an advocate out of that region for MMIW. This red image is to raise awareness for MMIP. It's a prominent symbol for the epidemic of violence against Indigenous women and girls. The handprint on the dress symbolizes the voices of those who have been lost, representing the silence surrounding these cases. MMIP group refers to advocacy organization dedicated to bringing awareness and justice to these cases. Also, I just want to acknowledge May 5th is National Day of Awareness for MMIW and relatives. Navajo Nation has a missing and murdered Dene relatives group here on the reservation. I would like to acknowledge our Shiprock delegate, Amber Crotty, for advocating for the funds to be returned for MMDR and search dogs. We are planning a meeting on this Sunday in Window Rock, Arizona, for missing and murdered Dene relatives. I would like to thank you all for joining us for MMIW presentation. Hakone diyen nalalondo. Thank you.
Madeline. Thank you, Madeline, for sharing that heartfelt story with us. Your words remind us that behind every statistics is a real person, a family, and a community seeking answers. Stories like yours help us connect more deeply with the human impact of this crisis. Our final speaker is the Reverend Brokenleg, a priest who serves on the staff of the presiding bishop. Reverend Brokenleg, is there anything you would like to share before we get into questions?
Well, haumi taku yapi, takala e hake, shaniqua e machiapi. No, I guess we can start with a question. I think just maybe I want to share a story of my cousin who was killed last year by her ex. She was fleeing from him, and he chased her down with his car and hit her, and she died. Also injured her friend that was with her. And I think this touches close to most all Indigenous people can tell a story similar to that one or one like it. And I think given many of us in rural areas, they don't get a lot of coverage. And I think even in urban areas, sometimes the media doesn't see our stories as important as maybe stories of other folks.
Okay. Question for you. How can data collection methods be improved to reflect the true number of missing and murdered victims? And I'm asking because as a member of the presiding bishop staff, I am sure you are approached with many of these questions. And how do you respond to some of these?
Well, I think prior to working as a priest, I was an epidemiologist and I served the tribes in the Great Lakes area. And I focused on behavioral health. And we did talk about missing and murdered Indigenous relatives. And we also talked about the problem of miscategorization of ethnic groups and ethnic identities a lot of times on the death records of folks, or just in general, people don't know folks' ethnicity, and they'll assume if they have, for example, a Spanish last name, they may be an enrolled member of a tribe, but because their last name is Espinoza, they get listed as a Latina rather than Indigenous. Or people don't realize that folks can have multiple identities, right? They could be Latina and also Indigenous. And that's a very common problem across Indian country. So that can help with numbers. That's one of the problems. We also have a huge problems with jurisdiction and how we count who is and who isn't Indigenous. We're the only ethnic group where we are counted by are we enrolled? Are we not? Are we half Indian? Are we a quarter Indian? Are we full blood? Like, we don't do that with other ethnic groups. And yet, I don't know, sometimes I feel like we're treated like we're cattle or something by the United States government and how they do those things. So I think there's a lot of different situations and problems that contribute to how we are counted and who counts and who's doing the counting.
Mm-hmm. How do jurisdiction gaps between tribal, federal, and local law enforcement hinder investigations into cases involving Indigenous women?
Well, so you have, in some cases, there's two different police departments within a tribe. You can have the Bureau of Indian Affairs Police and the tribal police both operating in the same area, and that creates conflicts. Often, tribes have very particular feelings about the Bureau of Indian Affairs and how they operate. And then in some cases, the tribes took over and do all of the policing themselves. There's not enough funding to properly police huge geographical areas, and with jurisdiction problems, there's a decision that was made a long time ago called Oliphant and Suquamish that said that tribes had limited authority to prosecute non-Indians on reservation lands. And so that left problems where if a white person came onto a land, perpetrated a crime against an Indigenous person, they could not be prosecuted by the tribal police. Only the FBI could come in and do something then. And so that meant that a huge number of crimes were not getting dealt with or taken care of. That's part of the jurisdictional issue. We also have, how are tribes communicating with other tribes or communicating with county and state authorities to share information about maybe possible perpetrators or where people are living, and then who can prosecute those things. Sometimes only the FBI can come in and prosecute certain crimes on reservations. This was changed or attempted to be changed with the Violence Against Women Act, or VAWA, which was passed in 1994. And then later, It was reauthorized. The original VAWA did not include any of Alaska. And so all the Alaska villages and indigenous people there were not included in that. And so that continued to be a problem there. And with the reauthorization in 2022, that added things like domestic violence, crimes such as sexual violence, sex trafficking, and stalking were included in there, along with the Alaska Native villages.
It's another question here. How does the loss of Indigenous women affect families, communities, and cultural continuity?
I think it's there's so many things, but I think it's part of the historical trauma that is carried down, right? It affects the family. We would argue that it affects the community spiritually, all the way down to a spiritual level, right? Not only are you having women who traditionally were seen as the leaders, at least in my community, they're the ones that are in charge, and it can affect them, but also then it leads to a lot of situations with what we call adverse childhood experiences. So there's this thing called an ACE score, and you get a score from 1 to 10, and it's a questions about abuse, neglect, and household dysfunction. And the higher the ACE score, they're linked to health outcomes, things like PTSD, unintended pregnancy, fetal death, traumatic brain injury, injuries, STIs, higher rates of cancer, diabetes, risk behavior, alcohol, drugs, sex. Lower sexual attainment, lower income, employment problems, all of those are linked with higher ACE scores. And so when you have these traumatic things that are happening to families and women, that increases the ACE score for folks in the family, which then later can cause significant outcomes. And when we've looked at ACE scores on a population-based level, you can see that Native folks have a much higher, on average, ACE score compared to all races.
How about federal funding? How can federal funding and resources be better directed to support tribal law enforcement and victim services?
That's a really good question. I'm not an expert, but here are some ideas that I think. I mean, like, one, we might have 4 police officers policing an area the size of the state of Connecticut. That would be an example. If we looked at like Pine Ridge and Connecticut, they're about the same geographical size, and you have a very small number of police officers to do all of that. And so more funding, obviously, to help train so that they're providing culturally appropriate care to the communities with considerations about intergenerational trauma and trauma-informed response and things like that. And I think we also could do some sort of sharing, where like maybe we need detectives, but we can't afford to have detectives on each reservation. So maybe we have some that are shared regionally or something along those lines, so that it could be done. I don't think we give the weight of this that it needs or the funding that it needs, and I think we need to think about how we do things equitably. There's so many problems in Indian country in terms of funding. Just for an example, with healthcare, more money is spent on the care per person on the care of federal prisoners than is spent on Indian healthcare. So by about half. So we spend, for federal prisoners, who I would argue deserve quality healthcare too, we spend twice as much on them than we do per person for Indian healthcare. Like, that's an atrocity. And that's kind of, if you look at that, that kind of is how it is across the board in Indian country for many things, including policing.
I have a question for you, Reverend Cannon Royals. You mentioned how we commemorate some victims in the church, but not in others. How might our prayers, liturgies, or teaching change to better honor Indigenous victims and tell the truth about this crisis?
Thank you, Gloria. Well, I think the first step is a step like we're taking today to actually know the truth. It's very difficult when our information resources omit with racial bias or economic bias of any sort. And it's important that when we have informative resources, sharing information with us, that we have other means of being able to transfer that knowledge in other places. I know that any time that the Episcopal Church's calendar has a new commemoration on it, it really takes a lot of work to get that designation to happen. And Shaniqua can speak more about the process itself. But it really does mean that when a minority group, for instance, is bringing forth a commemoration of some sort, that we really need to think about how to be supportive of that and bring it along. Shaniqua, you might want to talk about the process for commemorations.
I don't know it very well, unfortunately, but I do know that right now, going through the General Convention, we're talking about putting in the children of the boarding schools, and that that has an associated prayer and a readings and a date that they're looking at, and so that could be something that folks could be supporting as we go into General Convention in 2027. I think that would be the second reading of that, I think.
Another question, what role do community leaders, elders, and cultural traditions play in healing and advocacy?
Well, I can speak a little bit to that from my own community, the Pasquayaki community, and of course, every community is different. There are ways in which, if there's violence committed against a woman in our community, there's women's ceremonies that take place in order to try and be supportive and heal the woman who was violated in any way. And it's intergenerational in practice, the ceremony itself. Women who are living off reservation and are violated are oftentimes not given the opportunity to encounter those ceremonies in the same way. Part of it has to do with something that Shaniqua mentioned, and it's a huge issue we should all be aware of. I remember the first time Bishop Redall and I worked on the anti-racism training here in the Diocese of Arizona, and I made the statement to her that the only other place where blood quantum level makes any difference is with dog and horse breeding. And for us to acknowledge that as a people, that we sit in a system that acknowledges that we measure Native people in the same terms as we measure breeding of dogs and horses, is a tragedy, right? So sometimes Indigenous women who are not full blood, for instance, might not be given the same opportunity because it's that colonized settler mentality has infiltrated the communities at some level. Those of us who are in the elder category now are trying to make that change, to acknowledge that this is damage that has been done to us, again, going all the way back to the doctrine of discovery and all the systemic policies that have been put in place to date that continue to contribute. As far as communities are concerned, there are huge movements, as Madeline mentioned, for us to commemorate May 5th as a community together, to come together and support. There are many, many markers on roads in very remote areas. You often find a marker of some sort, and very often in the southern part of Arizona, in fact, we have some walks that go from one place like the tribal central area into a remote area to commemorate a person whose remains were found in that area, and they do it annually. We'll do that annually. Certainly, this is true for Emily Pike. She got a lot of attention because, as Madeline mentioned, the governor of Arizona designated the turquoise alert as a result of the experience that Emily's family and community supported. I also want to mention, Gloria, and I know Madeline didn't say this, but Emily Pike's remains she was dismembered, and her remains were found scattered along Highway 60. They were not all in one place. And it was unfortunate that even her family, many of them found out about her being murdered on the news. They were not even contacted directly. So they didn't get the visit to the door saying, I'm here to tell you of something that happened to your daughter or granddaughter or niece. And that's important for us to recognize as well, because it speaks again to the way in which the diminished value of a person continues to play in the way that the system works.
A question here, what role does education play in preventing violence against Indigenous women?
I think
Well,
educating
go
people
good. Go
about
ahead. No, go ahead.
I think educating people about it, um, and it can help change our community norms, and support change our community norms about how we value women and women's roles. I think part of or one of the problems of the Western education is that it took a lot of those teachings out of the education and favored men, and so then you have this, I don't know, mismatch in the system of how we educated our young people. I think we can enhance parenting skills, and we can also in education train teachers to be able to see when things might not be okay and intervene, so we can prevent harm and prevent future risk. I think also teaching children how to talk to adults or find people to help when something does come up, helping them to find their voice. Debbie, what were you going to say?
I appreciate that, Shaniqua. I was actually going to mention our Four Winds community here in Tucson, First Women Gather Around the Fire. Our women's circle, and we're meeting this coming weekend, in fact, are very dedicated to intergenerationally bringing women together to reestablish the understanding that many of us come from matriarchal societies, whereas the colonized settler systems have put an emphasis on male leadership and the importance of men over women. And I think that that's part of the work that we all individually need to do as well in our communities, is to raise up and empower our strong, resilient Indigenous women, and to talk about all of the ways, whether it's family systems, whether it's nurturing the community, whether it's leading ceremonies in whatever areas that women were leading to get that established again.
Okay. I have on here, Phoebe stated that it is powerful commemorating boarding school victims and survivors. Thanks for sharing that. Lisa also said it would be a great idea to have a resolution in regards to MMIW that could be brought forth to General Convention. Shirley stated that our ECW group is small and has limited resources. What would be suggestions of activities that we might undertake in our local urban communities? Any idea? And also, is the logo available for anyone to use on posters, etc.? That's the logo that Madeline showed, or there's just items available for purchase with the logo. I know the National Board of ECW does have on its website a logo, a t-shirt you can donate to. I think it's $30 that's on that website to go into advocacy for MMIW. Madeline stated that it's $200 to use the logo. Madison Bryan stated that my apologies has been ask as I came in late. I am an Indigenous young woman who has dedicated my work to bringing awareness to these issues. However, I have experienced structural barriers such as funding, pushback, etc. What actions or organizations would you recommend to people like me who want to see the systemic change?
One, I would say thank you very much for doing that work, Madison. And on the ECW webpage, we put up a bunch of organizations that you can work with. I don't have them at the top of my head, but I can look them up. But they're on the page to see that you could join or affiliate with or work with. I think that would be very helpful. And I think sometimes, like our traditional way of leadership was always to constantly be forming leaders, because leadership isn't something that someone is or is not. It's a time that you're called to be a leader, and so we always want to form. But I think sometimes part of our boarding school developed mentality is that we think that we have to hold on to power, and so the leaders just want to stay and they don't help elevate that. And so I think some of what you're experiencing is that problem that I just described, where folks are going to kind of push back against you because they don't always see young people as leaders, when traditionally that was always how we did things, right? So sorry, take it for what it is, what I said.
Okay. Sue stated that there are questions on the WOVA chat. I cannot see those at this time. Sue, if you could unmute yourself, if you see one, you can read the question. While she's doing that, Lisa wants to know, has the church played a role in causing or combating the crisis of MMIW or MMIR?
Hi, Gloria. Do you want me to ask some questions from the chat?
WOVA chat.
Yeah. One you already answered, but Phoebe Chetfield asked, has the church played a role in causing or combating the crisis of MMIW, MMIR?
I would say yes to both, right? Like the church was part of the colonization process, right? And looking to how that happened, I know our church also supported boarding schools and all of those things. If we talk about how historical trauma works, and so yes, the church has done that. The church has also played a role in combating the crisis of MMIW and speaking out against it. And I think that part of our role as church leaders, both lay and ordained, we can talk about it, advocate for it, and make sure we raise awareness about it. I always have my little red hand on my clergy shirts when I'm out, so people sometimes ask me what that means, and I can have opportunity then to talk about it. So, yeah, I think both of those things. One thing that I want to mention, I don't think we talked. Debbie, you talked about it a little bit, but I don't think we really think about the secondary impacts of our resource extraction. Like we often think about that as environmental, like creation care issues with the mines and the pipelines, but those secondary consequences of that are the man camps and missing and murdered Indigenous women and higher rates of abuse and domestic violence. There's like all of these things that just sort of go out when those things happen. And I don't think when folks are doing the environmental impact assessment, they don't think about those things and how those are going to impact the communities, but they are very real and they happen.
Thank you. All right. So a couple other questions. This one was mine. For families of Ella and Emily, what kinds of support, spiritual, emotional, legal, have been most needed, and where have the systems fallen short?
Well, I think I can say a little bit about the support is in the community for both of them. The fact that Emily's family is very central in the news and in social media, it's a little bit more well known. So the family is getting tremendous support, knowing that people know the story. What I don't think the connection is often not made is one that we're also trying to continue to make in our teaching, is that Emily was in a group home 100 miles away from her home. And the question really should be, why was she taken out of her community to be able to deal with whatever the issues were? It's very much like the boarding school experience when children were removed from their homes and they lost their support. So, we have to think about supporting the family and changing the structures. And oftentimes, as Shaniqua mentioned, the systems for healthcare and mental health care and social care are not the same in a rural community, and certainly not on reservations as they are off reservations. And that's a policy thing as well as a cost, right? A financial thing.
Thank you. Gloria, do we have time to ask a couple more questions from that chat or no?
No, not at this
Okay.
time.
Okay.
We are coming to and close. I want to thank all of you, especially our panelists and our attendants that was here. It is our hope and prayer that awareness will grow, will continue to grow, that reporting will improve, and that justice will move forward so that the women and girls everywhere may be protected, honored, and valued. We'd like to thank all of our speakers and everyone here for listening, learning, and being a part of this important conversation. And we will now end it with a song from Reverend Shaniqua, a song to heart for something for us to think about as we move forward. Thanks again.
Thank you. So the song is sort of a song, Prayers of the People. I'll just sing a couple of verses for you. Creator God, we cry to you, hear our prayer, hear our prayer. Creator God, we cry to you, hear our prayer, hear our prayer. For healing of our Mother Earth, for all to know her endless worth, for right relationships within, with all you made, our sacred kin. For broken spirits, broken bones, for children who will not come home, for hate in hearts with great disdain, for people tired, a world in pain. Creator God, we cry to you, hear our prayer, hear our prayer. Creator God, we cry to you, hear our prayer, hear our prayer. For all abused and all disowned, for all the sick, for all alone, for all distressed, struggling to cope, for wholeness, health, relief, and hope, for lives and loves who now are gone, for all of those who journeyed on, for all who move across the deep, for all who mourn, for all who weep. Creator God, we cry to you, hear our prayer, hear our prayer. Creator God, we cry to you, hear our prayer, hear our prayer. May all creation heed your call to reconcile with one and all. Grant us your hope, your sight, your nerve. with hearts that love and hands that serve. Creator God, we cry to you. Hear our prayer, hear our prayer. Creator God, we cry to you. Hear our prayer, hear our prayer.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone, again. We hope to see you again. Thank you.